I feel an essence, and typically will get a seed of a character from someone I know in my life. So, um, I might, especially when I start writing, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to think of this as, my sixth grade English teacher or whatever. And then it morphs and the character becomes its own thing. But usually it starts as a seed of something I've experienced, even if it's literally like, the cashier at the grocery store or whatever. I often have to go back, like my writing group will be like, you haven't described anything about what this person looks like. And I think, you know, I I think part of that is coming from screenwriting. Like I write, interior bathroom, and someone else figures out what the bathroom looks like. Like that's not my problem. So often my first drafts are come up short because I haven't done a lot of that stuff that I need to do as a novel writer of like describing the setting and stage directions. Yes, I have that because I'm also used to that in a script. But um, I do think being an actor is like such good practice and such gives you so much as a writer, which I never would have realized. But, an actor, the sort of number one rule is like, don't judge your character because you are the character, right? You need to see them from the inside. And yes, we judge ourselves, but in a very different way of like judging someone outside of ourselves, right? So we judge ourselves in a very personal way. So it's like, don't judge them like you would judge someone else. And I think as a writer, that's really important because, you know, all of these people, when you're in their heads, they believe they're doing quote unquote the right thing or whatever they need to do, right? And that's so important, I think. Also in creating interesting characters who are flawed because you're not judging them critically, so you're not thinking like, I don't know, I always hate the like the character needs to be likable, it's like, well, they need to be interesting. Turn Off the Light is told from two perspectives. The first one is Edith. She's in the 1600s, early, first settler of America, and the present day. And it's the same house on the eastern shore of Virginia. And strange things are happening in the house and to both women in both timelines. Edith is a healer, which I think many of us know at that time in the 1600s was often mistaken for a witch, um, even though a man could do it and just be the apothecary. But she is a healer. She's never sort of been great at people. Like she's just better with plants and nature, and she's a little bit whimsical and in her head, and she starts to kind of the eyes of the town are on her. And I think the sort of true horror of the book is more about that, the community sort of turning against her. But there's also strange things happening where she starts to wonder if maybe what these people are saying about her being a witch, about her having let the devil in, maybe they're right. And I think that's sort of the tragedy of her storyline is like, as many women do, we often question ourselves before we question something else. And so she starts to question herself, not unlike Flora in Dearest. So the Eastern Shore of Virginia, a lot of people, honestly, I think probably don't even really know it exists. It's, I grew up in Virginia Beach, which is across the Chesapeake Bay from Eastern Shore. And it's basically a peninsula that comes off of Maryland and goes down, it crosses the border, even though it's across the water, and goes all the way pretty much down to the tip of Virginia. And it's such a fascinating place. There's sort of a touristic center that is really cute restaurants, again, touristy destination spot. Once you get out of that, the rest of the Eastern Shore is almost like a time capsule. Like a lot of it's abandoned and kind of run down. And I just thought it was, not only does it work because it was an early, a place where early settlers were, but it in and of itself is even more isolating. And I really wanted Edith and even Claire in the present day, but especially Edith, to feel isolated. And look, like as an early settler in Virginia, you're already pretty isolated, right? Like you've left your home country, assuming, and uh, there's not a lot of resources, and but then you go to the Eastern Shore where you have to take a boat across the Chesapeake Bay, which is like 20 miles or something. Like that's incredibly isolating, and any neighbor is the closest neighbor is 2 miles away, and you have to walk on foot because you know no one could really afford horses at that time. I think maybe like one person might have had a horse on the Eastern Shore. So um, it was an incredibly isolating place, which was interesting to me, um, in terms of telling this story and her sort of feeling like she had nowhere to turn. I did want to change the way people think about hauntings to sort of provide an entirely different explanation for what we would consider a haunted house. Is it what I believe? I'm not sure, but I think it's a potential. It's one potential explanation for the fabric of our universe. And in terms of the house itself, I think is, as you said, definitely a character, and that one is definitely more from the imagination. It's some of it is just like horror tropes that are fun to lean into, right? Like adding these little Easter eggs and things. But the idea of a lot of the moments, especially with the daughter. So my own daughter was or is for sure. She's 5 now, and it's happening less as she gets older. But starting when she was like 1.5, it became very clear that she was seeing, interacting with spirits in our apartment. Um, so I have a ton of stories from that. And, like, there was one time when this was before she could even really talk, she started crying in the middle of her nap. And we figured she had dropped her lovey, out of the crib. And so my husband went in, but she was holding her lovey, and she was still crying. And he thought that was strange. And um, we just had this sense from her. She kept looking in this one spot in the room. She would always look in this one corner. And so he said, like, is someone here? And she shook her head, no. And he said, was someone here? And she said, yeah. And he's like, are you scared? She said, no. And he's like, are you sad that they left? And she's like, yeah, because they had been playing together. And she was like bummed that her friend left. And there was another time when I was reading to her, and she looked in that same spot, and she like all of a sudden just sat up, and she was like, my house. And I was like, sweetie, is someone here? And she stared for another like 2 minutes. And then she goes, no, like as if she's like, not anymore. We have so many examples. Like she would literally be like dancing carefree in the living room and then see something and run for safety, like onto her high chair, like shaking because she saw something. So anyway, she's had a lot of, she's like my little psychic child. She's read my mind literally many times. So I think, being a parent to that, naturally you start asking these questions. You also are now in this sort of odd position of like, not only, okay, what do I believe? What do I think is going on here? But also like, do I need to protect my child? Should I encourage her? Like what, like honestly, at that point, she probably understood much better than I did what was going on, like how the universe works. But yeah, a lot of that is sort of, and some of those specific stories are in Turn Off the Light, as you might recognize, but like a lot of that inspired me wanting to kind of ask this question, like, okay, well, what's another possibility of what could be happening here? So the daughter is in the present day, and that's Claire's daughter. She grew up on the Eastern Shore. And then when she was 16, her older sister went missing and kind of fractured the family. And she left the Eastern Shore, never to return again, was pretty much the plan. As is, that's a trope I love in mysteries. It's like coming back to your hometown. We all love that. So she comes back with her daughter, who's 4 in the book. And she's coming back because her father is basically on the verge of death. and her sister's been taking care of him. And so she comes back to her childhood home to essentially say goodbye to her dad. And that's when these weird things start happening. I kind of did want to include like what we all think of when we think of a haunted house, like the things, like the TV turning on, the lights going out, a window opening, a candle blowing out. I wanted to include as many of those things as possible because, what I'm trying to do with the book is offer this alternate explanation of what could be happening. So I kind of wanted to make the point of like even the most, and especially the most mundane things that happen in a haunting can be explained in this way, right? I feel like with all of these podcasts and stuff, I'm like, I need to do another episode that's like post, we can talk the spoilers because it's so hard to talk around them. But yeah, I kind of wanted all of the tropes in there because like when you're kind of trying to change the way people think about something, it's like you want to give them everything they're used to, right? And then saying, haha, but it's actually this is what's happening. It's really interesting because so the father has dementia. My grandfather had dementia, so I have some experience with that. I was much younger. But I thought of that element really early on. In even earlier iterations of the book, I knew that the dad was sick with dementia on the verge of death. That's what brings her back, and so I think in my writer brain, because so many other elements got added and changed, and I did all these drafts, I think in my writer brain, that sort of component was became less important somehow. I think mostly because it had been built in from the beginning. But the truth is, what's been so interesting is early readers. I've had many early readers reach out saying that component of the dad with dementia, like, has helped them work through their own, taking care of parents, this phase of life where you have little kids and then you're also, that sandwich phase, right? You're also taking care of your parents. And people who have said, oh, my dad died of dementia, my grandfather died, whatever it is, like it's such a grueling disease in its own specific way that it's really spoken to people. And I think I took that for granted. I love the dad character and sort of how he's trapped in his own mind. And, we realize he may actually have some answers, but he just can't communicate them. So I always loved their relationship. I thought it was really special, but I didn't think that would be something that readers would connect with so much. And it's been really awesome to see that.